this is the star of the show. This was one of the monarchs I saw on my bike tour. And like Connie said in the introduction, my goal of my bike tour was to bike the route of the monarch migration and to be their voice. So I heard a plug in there to endorse candidates and to vote for on behalf of monarchs and other creatures. That's such an important message. And monarchs can't vote, but wow, what would the world be like if they could? And monarchs can't call the president and they can't run for city council, but we can do that on their behalf. So my bike ride was just that, was to be their voice. And by riding along with the monarchs, I was able to see people every single day that could help, that could join the cause, that could be part of the solution. And I gave presentations on my trip, and my favorite line, and a line I tried to say every single time, was, I didn't see a monarch every day, but every day I saw someone that could help. And so that list from the beginning of ways to get involved, that's just so powerful and awesome and important. And I'll be reiterating some of those for sure during the next 40 minutes or so, 30 minutes or so. So anyway, this is a monarch. I'm sure everyone knows that. This is a male monarch. You can tell because he has those black dots on his hind wing. Those are scent glands. The monarchs don't actually really use them but they're sort of residual. And he is nectaring on a swamp milkweed. And milkweed is the other main character of the story. If there's not milkweed, there's not monarchs, because monarchs, females only lay their eggs on milkweed. And the milkweed is the only food source of the monarch caterpillars. So if there's no milkweed, there's no monarchs. Now this picture is interesting because this is a male. He's not laying eggs, obviously, but he is nectaring. Adult monarchs also need milkweed for nectar, but they don't need just milkweed. They're generalists when it comes to nectaring. So they like all sorts of native plants. So when you have your garden, you want to be thinking about milkweed for the caterpillars, and then lots and lots of nectar plants for the adults that are feeding. A little bit more general ecology of the monarch for folks that don't know. And if you want a more specific question, throw that in the chat and hopefully we can dive in a little deeper if people are interested in specific elements. But this is the range map of the monarch. The summer months are colored yellow, green is spring range, orange is fall, and then there are a few blue dots, and that's where they overwinter. And you'll also see that there is this non-colored line at the Rocky Mountains. And oops, that was we'll back up there. The Rockies sort of act like a fence and divide the monarchs up into the eastern and western populations. Now, population from the standpoint of science means diverse genetics. The eastern and western monarchs are actually not genetically distinct. So they're technically one population, but for the sake of this presentation and most of the things you read about online, there's the eastern population and they overwinter in Mexico. And then the western monarchs overwinter in California. And if people have questions about western monarchs, I'm again happy to answer those. But for now, I'm going to just stick to the eastern monarchs. Basically, all the monarchs born between the Rocky Mountains and the Atlantic Ocean fly to this tiny bit of forest in Mexico. And I'll have a few pictures later on. But you can see, imagine that huge range in the summer, and then a very, very tiny range in the winter. So it's a very interesting life history. And then you also look at the summer range and the spring range, and this is how you know that it's possible to ride your bike with them. Because unlike so many animals that have these very narrow migratory pathways or very narrow ranges, or maybe they're confined to very specific habitat types, once the monarch hits Texas in the spring, they spread out. And basically, as long as I was in Texas in the spring, pretty much every single road was the route of the monarch. And as long as I was in the upper Midwest in the summer, any road I was on was basically the route of the monarch butterfly. So the range of the monarch is one of the main reasons that allowed me to bike with them. The other kind of extraordinary coincidence is that the monarch, not an individual monarch, but the monarch as like one organism moves about 60 miles a day and on their migration, which is the exact distance, in my opinion, that's perfect for bike touring. Not too fast, not too slow. So I tried to go about 60 miles a day. Again, it just worked. It just was a really wonderful coincidence how great of a traveling companion they are. So this is my route overlaid with the Monarch range map, and kind of again talking about what I just said. I could pretty much go anywhere. I started in Mexico in March, and I traveled north into their summer range. I did a big East Coast loop for a few reasons. One, it's kind of dumb. I probably would have done this route differently in another time, but the only state I had never biked in was Rhode Island. So when I was planning my route, I was like, I'm going to Rhode Island. And then of course I questioned that decision multiple times when I was biking those extra like 2,000-3,000 miles. And then, but from the East Coast, I went back. I mentioned I'm from Kansas City, so I stopped in Kansas City twice and then headed back south. I started in March and I finished in November, which is about the timeline of the Monarch. And my entire route was 10,201 miles. You'll notice there's a lot of squiggles in this route. And the squiggles are basically every time someone invited me somewhere. So one of my mottos on my trip was say yes. So as long as I felt safe, I really tried to say yes to opportunities. So people would find out about my trip, especially the more interviews I gave, the more presentations I did, word started to get out. And I'd receive emails and social media messages saying, hey, I have a school in Omaha, or oh, I have a farm in Texas, or whatnot. Would you come? And I'd look at my map and I'd do some math and think, okay, I can do this. And then I'd try and say yes as much as possible. So pretty much every squiggle was me saying yes. And over the course of, I think it's about 8.5 months, I stayed with 68 families. And most of those were strangers when I first met them. So I had a lot of support, considering that it was a solo trip. I would argue that it wasn't. I was the only one biking, but I had just so much support. So a little bit more about bike touring for folks that don't know. This is kind of my setup. You can see that the bike there is nothing glamorous. I actually built that bike from a collection of used parts and new parts back in 2012, I believe, for a bike tour I did in South America. It's the perfect setup for a couple reasons. One, that bike is solid. It's a steel frame, old mountain bike frame. It doesn't break down. It's just so hardy. It's heavy, but it's hardy. And then I could also lean that bike up against a gas station or a grocery store and go in and feel pretty confident that no one was going to look at that bike and be like, that's a bike we're stealing. So it's kind of an anti-theft device. And then you'll see on the bike, I have bags. Those bags are called panniers. The front ones are store-bought. And in those, I carried my sleeping bag, my sleeping pad, my computer, book, journal, light, kind of like, I would call it in presentations to kids, my bedroom and my office was in the front. And then in the back was my kitchen. So I had a stove. I usually tried to carry about a day's worth of food. I also would have my tools for minor repairs, a tent. That blue thing on the back of my bike is a camp chair, a folding camp chair that I would tell kids in presentations was my sofa. They'd always roll their eyes and be like, that's not a sofa, but it is sort of. And then what else did I have in the back? Oh, rain gear, a few other random things. But what's so awesome about this setup is I'm completely contained, right? Of course, I needed a grocery store once a day or once every few days. But other than that, I didn't need to have a plan because whatever happened, I was ready for it. And in this way, I had so much freedom. So I showed that red line in the beginning. That red line was like a general idea. It was like, I want to go to Rhode Island. How I'm going to get there, I didn't have a plan. It didn't really matter to me. I just bike about 60 miles and then stop. So because of this setup, I was able I just stop and camp and cook when I was hungry, camp when I was tired. This is like the most classic camp spot on my trip. I did only stealth camping. I never once paid to camp. So my tent is hidden in behind the trees there, and then there's the the car going by. This is a highway in Texas. And I did this for a couple reasons. One, doing it this way, I never had to plan anything. So I never had to race to get somewhere, race or choose my route specifically to get to a certain spot. I also didn't have to spend any money. So I've lived very, very cheaply on my trip. And then third, this is like calling to attention the most important thing monarchs need, which is habitat. And I am trying to give a human perspective to this migration. So here I am biking 10,000 miles, and every single night at about this time when the sun's starting to set, I'm looking around, I'm thinking, where am I going to sleep? And the monarchs are doing the same thing. And there were nights where it was perfectly obvious. It was like, yes, that spot right there. And then there was other nights where I'd bike for 2 or 3 extra hours and be tired and frustrated and hungry, and there just wouldn't be what I needed. And I think if we can start to see the planet through the eyes of a monarch, if we can start to see that there are nights where they could fly for 20 miles and not find habitat, and if we could start to feel what that must be like, well, I think we would start to change. And that's what we need to do, is we need to change, because a monarch we won't have monarchs if we only protect their habitat in Mexico and if we only protect their summer habitat in the upper Midwest. We need to protect literally every single place in between. And I'll get more to that. But first I want to highlight a few more reasons bike touring is awesome. One, super easy to clean your house. I only clean my house really when I'm camping. Two, or I guess this would be like 4 at this point, would be you get to stop and see so many other creatures. So on my tour was focused on monarchs, but every single day I saw another creature that was equally as amazing. And I wrote a book about monarchs, but I could have written a book about all of the toads I saw, or the skunks, or the snakes, or the birds. Like there's just, or the insects, or the flowers. Like there's just so many stories out there. And I think often we forget that, and we drive down the highway and we don't think about the fact that there's this whole world living just a few feet off the pavement. And if we could slow down, and if we can stop, and if we can notice this beauty, then I think that also goes a long way to starting to protect this land that we need to protect. And then another great thing about bike touring is you get stopped often and you get lots of roadside hospitality. This was in Mexico. I was biking down this super boring, super hot highway. And I was basically like, in 12 miles you can turn. In 11 miles and 1.5 miles you can turn. In 11 miles, I'm just like counting down for a turn. And I hear this motorcycle, and I notice that as the motorcycle is getting closer, the motorcycle is slowing down. And my first reaction is like, oh great, here we go. But of course he stops and he's like, hey, you want some ice cream? And back to my say yes rule, I felt safe, and I said yeah. And that was amazing ice cream. And I honestly can't remember a mile before or after, but bike touring allows these random spontaneous moments to occur in a way that all other travel doesn't, in my opinion. So I'm really grateful for bike touring for that. Of course, it wasn't just spontaneous. I also ate ice cream. Wow, I had so much ice cream on this trip. In fact, during my presentations, I talk about ice cream, and I would often talk about that motorcycle man in Mexico and his strawberry ice cream. And then I talk about Margaret from this photo. And I met Margaret in Ontario and, Quebec. Sorry, Margaret. And she was like a friend of a friend, maybe of a friend, I can't really remember. But she said, hey, I have a dairy farm. You want to stay on our farm? And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And then when I got there, she was like, oh, I made some homemade ice cream. Do you want some? And I'm like, oh my gosh, meant to be. I biked 5,000 miles for this ice cream. But I would give presentations. I'd talk about those two. And one time, I forget what state I was in, somewhere in the United States, someone came up to me. They must have been in high school age. And they were like nearly in tears. And they were like, no one's given you ice cream in the United States? And I was like, no, I just only put 2 stories. So after that, I started also talking about some ice cream encounters in the US, but I had a lot of ice cream. It's like a character in the story. Now, the reason I chose to put this photo with Margaret is because it's such a wonderful example of that I was sort of speaking to about camping. I also felt like bonded to the monarch's experience. because the same people helping me, the same people inviting me in and giving me ice cream, were also often the same people feeding the monarchs. So Margaret in this picture is feeding me, and in the background, that's her yard full of flowers. So she was feeding the monarchs. And I just love that. I love that the monarchs and I were equally as excited to get to Margaret's house. Now, I think the kind of the last thing I want to speak about to bike touring and its advantages is sort of what I've already spoken to, but I was able to bike 10,000 miles and I got very, very good. Not even a humble brag, just a brag that that I could find monarchs while biking about 10 miles an hour. So this is a photo of me biking down a road, I think in Indiana, and there's some milkweed in the foreground there, and you can see me. I'm like, this is a staged photo, but this is what would happen. I'd see a monarch or a milkweed usually. First I'd see milkweed, and then I'd kind of slow down a little, and I'd see the monarch, and I'd slam on my brakes, and I'd throw my bike down because remember, I don't need to take care of it too much because it's sturdy. And then I would go explore the shoulder of the road. So if you haven't yet noticed the monarch in this photo, here's the common milkweed, and then here's the caterpillar. And I actually took a closer up photo. That's the same caterpillar there. And this caterpillar was doing this really interesting behavior where he was taking his frass, which is the fancy science name for poo. He was taking his frass and he was grabbing it in his mandibles, and then he was like kind of like a crane moving back and forth and then throwing it off the plant. And I imagine that this was multiple reasons, but one of the reasons I think, and I haven't heard if this is correct or not, is that when I'm biking and I'm looking at milkweed, one of the things I notice is frass, and if I notice frass, I stop because I'm like, that means there's a caterpillar there. So I have to think that predators that might want to eat a caterpillar would be doing the same thing, and by cleaning off that leaf, it's helping disguise the fact that there's a meal potentially on that plant. So this was happening. Let me just go back. Like, what is that? 12 inches from pavement. So there's just so many cool things happening right along our roads. Now, as I said, I got really good at finding monarchs and milkweed, but the problem with that is I saw when I saw like a roadside getting mowed at the wrong time of year, it hurt so much, and I was alone most of the time. So I'm biking down the road. In this case, I knew that there were caterpillars that were big 5th star caterpillars. There were times where I'd stop and I'd move all the eggs to milkweed if I could find them off the road, but it weighed on you. And the monarchs were my friends at this point, right? Like, I have a deep love for them. I see the world through their eyes, and so it would be sad. Like, I would cry when I'd see something like this. And it wasn't just on the side of the road, it was everywhere. And so because of my trip, when I bike by a school or a suburban neighborhood or a farm, I don't see beautiful green grass. I see a wasteland. And I see what the monarchs see, which is all of their habitat removed. And I know when I see these things, I know that probably everyone that's watching has a green grass lawn, at least a little bit of one. I know what people are trying to do is be good neighbors. But what I'm saying and what I'm asking people to do is think about their monarch neighbors and their frog neighbors and be good neighbors to the birds as well. And what that means time and time again is sharing. So I'm not saying dig up every single green piece of green grass. I'm saying let's start to share. And the reason I'm saying this is because the monarchs are disappearing. The eastern monarch migration is in danger of disappearing. And this is a graph. Don't worry about the numbers. I'm not even going to read them because there's so much glare on my screen. I have no idea what I'm even looking at. All you need to know and all you need to see, a lot of you have already seen this, is kind of squint and see the trajectory. So all wild populations have ups and downs, good years and bad years. That's normal. But what's not normal is the trend. And you can see that trend is going down, and down eventually goes to zero, to extinction. And it's not extinction of the monarch. There's monarchs in New Zealand and Spain. There's monarchs in California, as we know. but it's this multi-generational, multinational migration that's in danger. And the main reason for this is habitat loss. So if you think about it, let's say, I'm going to use very basic numbers. There have been years where there have certainly been billions of monarchs. Even if there was only millions of monarchs, half of those are females. And each female is going to try and lay around 500 eggs, 200 to 500 eggs in the wild. And she doesn't want to lay all of those eggs on one milkweed, because if she did that, that's called egg dumping. When those eggs hatch, they look around for milkweed, they eat what they have, and then they're eating machines, and they would gobble up a bunch of monarchs on one milkweed, would gobble that milkweed up, and it would be gone within days. So what the females do is they will lay one egg per plant, ideally. And that way, when the egg hatches, wow, look at this, a buffet that grows in time with the monarch. It's perfect. So if we have even just 1 million monarchs and half of those are females, and then each of those females need 500 milkweed, you can start to see how many milkweeds we need. We don't need thousands or millions, we need billions of milkweed. And there used to be that. But again, go on a drive, go anywhere and see how much of the land is no longer space for monarchs. And you'll start to see why the migration is in danger. Before I move on, I just want to call to attention one other thing here. There's the line on this graph. That line, that dotted green line, is where scientists believe the population would be sustainable. And you can see that we haven't hit that. And so basically what that means is there could be an extreme storm in the winter or a bad year in the summer, and there's not enough monarchs to pad those extreme events. And those extreme events are getting more and more intense because of climate change. So when we go out to vote, we need to think about these things, and we need to really, really push for climate measures, because without stabilizing our climate, I mean, there's just no chance. So we really need to get things in focus and order. Now, I said all that, and it could be overwhelming. And what I loved about the list Connie said at the beginning was the one way to combat that despair that often comes from talking about climate change or habitat loss or the monarch's fate is to just get out there and do something, be part of the solution. I don't know, I wish I'd counted. I probably heard, I don't know, twice a day from people that they'd say, when I was a kid, we used to see lots of monarchs. And I always just used to be like, or I still am, what are you doing so that the next generation can see them? And quite honestly, a lot of the time I just got angry. I got angry that people had this beautiful experience, seeing monarchs in the fields, seeing lots of monarchs in the trees in the fall, and then kind of just, I mean, quite frankly, destroying it. And now I don't get to see that. And so to combat that despair and that anger, my thing, as I said in the beginning, was to be the monarch's voice. So during my presentation, I talked to about 9,000 people, did lots of interviews with newspapers and television and radio, but my favorite was with the kids. And this just energized me and made me feel way less hopeless and way more like, okay, if I can do this, then I can do the next thing. And if we're all doing something, then there's still hope. So I want to talk about a few other things that gave me hope on my trip. One kind of stems to the presentations with kids, but was outside visiting their gardens. So I would get invitations from teachers, and they actually would give me tours of the gardens with kids, and finding eggs on milkweed with kids in their school gardens was just so joyous. And then here's Bill, as mentioned. This is Bill from Native American Seed, and he gave me so much hope. I stayed with his family twice on my trip, on the spring and fall migration, and he started his career planting Bermuda grass, planting non-natives in Texas. And one day in the 80s, he was like, what am I doing? Why? And so he started learning about natives, and eventually that transformed into a farm. And so he actually grows native plants, harvests the seeds, and sells those seeds so others can also return the Texas prairie. And there is nothing more exciting than pulling into a driveway, going down the driveway on your bike and looking over and seeing rows of antelope horn milkweed. Wow. And then arriving to their guest house and his daughter Emily being like, oh, by the way, I stocked the fridge. Oh, and there's laundry. Oh, and a shower. Oh, and stay as long as you want. We can go canoeing. Oh, it was magical. Then there's like these little tiny spaces. Like there is so many places that we can give back to the prairie, even just alongside roads or railroad easements. This is in Sioux City. This is a city prairie that is here only because people fought for it, only because people said, no, we cannot let every ounce of prairie go. And wow, it gave me a lot of hope. And then there's the gardens. This is Amy's garden in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I love this garden because it's such a good example of sharing, right? It's being a good neighbor to the birds and the bees and your dog and your kids. So she's got the patio and the grass. And then she's got some ornamentals and common milkweed. And when I first got to her yard, I was like, all right, yeah, that's something. But she said, oh, I've already found 40 eggs on these milkweed. Okay, and so this is Oklahoma. This is in the spring. That means if only one of those eggs survives, that would be several hundred more eggs for the next generation. And if just a few of those survive, that's literally thousands of more eggs by the end of the summer. So literally every garden adds up. Now it doesn't have to be small. My favorite garden was Nadia's in Columbia, Missouri. I think that we don't want to just put our natives in the backyard. We want to celebrate them. The way we get the word out, the way we change the paradigm, the way we make people see that green grass isn't beautiful but is a waste, is by showcasing our natives in the front yard. And Nadia did an amazing job of that. And there's ways to incorporate trails and signs and all sorts of things for the neighbors that are scared. But I didn't actually include most of her yard in this photo because my favorite part was seeing this common milkweed in her neighbor's yard. And I asked Nadia about it and she said, well, the neighbor used to mow everything. And then they learned that if there's no milkweed, there's no monarchs. So now they mow around that milkweed. And this is what we need. We need someone like Nadia on every single street, planting natives that can spread, planting ideas that can spread. We need people to step up and just show what it could be. So I was so grateful for this day. It was much needed. And so I want to end with a few lessons that the monarchs have given me. There's a lot, so brace yourselves. But I think the first is this idea of teamwork. And this is a picture of the monarchs in Mexico. And it takes about 4 monarchs to equal the weight of a dime. But in Mexico, at times, there can be so many monarchs hanging from one branch that the collective weight of the monarchs can bend the branches and even break them. And so I didn't have a picture of that, but I did when I was going through my photos, I found this photo. And if you look in the background there, it's a small tree, but there is a tree literally bent from the weight of monarchs. And I think about it all the time. If it was just Nadia or just Bill or just Margaret or just me or just you, like it wouldn't add up to much. But if we all do a little, like we could metaphorically bend branches. And I think, wow, that's just, it's such a relief to know that it's not your responsibility alone, but you are part of the responsibility. And the monarchs, I think, teach us that. And they teach us this in another way too. In Mexico, most of the year, they're hanging from the branches to conserve their energy, which I can talk about if someone has questions. But on warm days, the sun will strike a part of the colony and they'll warm up to their flight threshold, and then they'll erupt into the sky and fill the sky with monarchs. And it's one of the most glorious things I've ever seen. But what I love most is I can close my eyes and I can hear the sound of their wings flapping. And so again, one monarch in the forest, I'm not going to hear. Just like if I'm the only one talking about monarchs, not very many people are going to hear. But when thousands join in, it creates something that's impossible to ignore. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell your neighbor, and eventually we'll tell everyone, which is what we need. Another lesson the monarch taught me is it does not matter where you live. This is a monarch in Manhattan. I chased this monarch around for a while. I'm so happy I got a photo for proof. I saw eggs in Queens, and I saw eggs in Brooklyn as well. So if there is milkweed, the monarchs will come. They're so democratic. They don't care who you are. They just need that milkweed and those nectar plants. And then monarchs are great guides. They're teachers. They remind us to find beauty in small things and small things. So this of course is another male monarch. So beautiful, impossible to ignore. This is a type of milkweed often referred to as butterfly weed. It's another popular one for houses. And it's so easy to see the beauty in them. But what I love about monarchs is they invite you to slow down. And they say, okay, if you think I'm beautiful, go look for my caterpillars. And you can't see this driving 60 miles an hour, but you'll see the caterpillars. And then as you're looking for caterpillars, you'll start to notice all the other creatures. You'll start to see the tussock moths, which also need milkweed. And you'll start to see the googly-eyed spiders. This is so cute, this little spider. And I think this is an important time to note. Some people think that the problem for the monarchs is that they're spiders that eat eggs. But that's, in my opinion, that's not true. If we had enough milkweed, then there would be enough milkweed for lots and lots of eggs so that lots and lots of them could get eaten by spiders, which then get eaten by birds. We need the spiders to eat the eggs. We can't take the few remaining monarchs and protect them from predators. That's not going to work. That's not saving anybody. And it's, in fact, adding to the problem. So we have to learn to love the spiders. And I think monarchs actually help us do that. And then you'll notice the other pollinators, like the hummingbird moths, one of my favorites. And of course, then you'll also maybe see a frog. This is a frog in a common milkweed. And so I love that it doesn't matter if your passion is monarchs or frogs or flowers or birds, whatever it is, if you give your time and your energy and your voice to this creature that you love, you'll be helping everyone. And so pick your passion. You don't have to ride across Mexico. You don't have to brave New York City. Hardest part of my trip. You don't have to get in arguments with skunks, which I did in Canada. All you have to do is plant milkweed, and if you do, the true adventurers, the monarchs, will come to you. So I'm going to. I should again mention I have a book. It's called Bicycling with Butterflies. My website is beyondabook.org. There's lots and lots of photos if you're interested in seeing photos from the trip or sending me a message. And with that, I will actually close down the PowerPoint and see if we've got any questions. So thanks.
And can you guys hear me? Because we do have questions. I'm going to share some of those. And before we actually share that, I'm going to share one little quote from your book that really spoke out to me, Sarah, to let you know. And I want to share it with everybody because it was exactly your closing too. And what Sarah says to us, as long as, she says, I kept my gate, as long as there are adventure takers, solution makers, change instigators, and migrants, our actions together will equal hope. So we want to thank you for this hope that you're giving us tonight. And let's go back to some of the questions that I saw here. The first one, Kimberly asked, is there a site where she can follow the monarch migration so we can see what's happening? She wants to share it with her fourth graders, which is terrific.
Oh, yes.
Jill followed her with a little solution. Are you familiar? She said, for everyone, other people may not have seen this in the chat, so I wanted you guys to see it. There's a website called journeynorth.org. And it shares.
That's what I was going to say.
Is that a good website, Sarah?
It's amazing. Journey North is amazing. So that goes back to citizen science. Everyone can be part of it. You actually will start you're observing life, and they have you submit the first monarch you see of the season, which helps note the northern and southern progress of the migration, as well as the first milkweed that you've seen. They've moved on to also just include monarchs in general all season. But Journey North is amazing. It's great, not just for citizen science and for tracking, but they have so many great resources for teachers, lots and lots of really good lessons, and it's in such a really articulate, just perfect way of explaining things. I've
Awesome.
learned a lot from Journey North.
Awesome.
Another great website for just information while we're on the subject is Monarch Joint Venture. Again, they also just have a plethora of information that's just really designed well, and it's readable for kids of all ages. And then Monarch Watch. And Monarch Watch is great because they also give milkweeds to schools for free. So they have programs to help get those school gardens off the ground.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you so much. I want to thank Mary also in the chat for talking about how she got her garden going. And if any of you want some suggestions, you might want to read what Mary wrote right at around 8:07. Ralph has a question for you. Will you talk a bit about how you combined writing and journaling with your biking and camping? How did all that work? And he said your book included plenty of details about your travel as well as about the monarch. So he's enjoyed it.
Thank you. I don't think people can appreciate sometimes how difficult it is to plan for presentations and do blogging and social media while on the road. It's definitely was probably one of the hardest parts of my trip. But I would set up camp. I usually, since I was just stealth camping, I'd usually go till about dark, and then I'd have a few hours before I was too tired. And I had my little camp chair, so I'd set my little camp chair up, and I had my little computer, and I would just try and write a blog about once a week, and then I would even when I was the most tired, I would journal, and sometimes that was just word, just like bullet points to remember things. Sometimes it was just a couple haikus, and if I was not super tired, I would write more. But the journaling was just crucial. I didn't plan to write a book, but I've been journaling for all my adventures, just to help. You forget a lot, so it's fun to go back every once in a while.
Excellent. One or two people jumped off, and so I'm going to say this before anybody else does. I am so grateful for everyone who's tuned in today because you are part of this solution and part of sharing this information. So I just want to make sure I got that out before one other person had to jump onto something else. Someone here is asking, so how did you get interested in saving the monarchs?
My first love is frogs. I grew up raising frogs, and then I went to college in California at Humboldt State University and studied wildlife biology. And the monarchs more or less found me. I'd done other trips where I'd done a kind of combined adventure with education, and I found out that the monarchs were already being used in classrooms, and that the monarchs were already helping teachers in so many ways to talk about geography and about ecology and life cycles. And then the more I kind of dove into the monarch and kind of once the idea was in my head, the more I learned, the more I was like, oh no, this is perfect. Like when I found out that the migration advances about 60 miles a day, I was just like, okay, I have to do it. So perfect.
Awesome. Someone here is asking, how do you feel about bringing eggs or caterpillars inside and protecting them as they mature? Do you have a thought on that?
I think that it's great to do for a few, because, and one of the reasons I say that is because I think it's so important to value the animals that are parasitizing and eating and predating these eggs and caterpillars, because they feed the frogs, they feed the snakes, they feed the birds, which I love. But if you're growing a garden and you it could be really demoralizing for every caterpillar to get eaten. And also it's once they go from their fifth instar to a chrysalis, they kind of get really hard to find. So I am all for taking a few in and protecting them, if you will, so that you can watch the transformation, so you can invite the neighbor kids over to watch them be clothes, so that you can, release one and feel good. But I worry when people phrase things like we're saving the monarchs and they're rearing hundreds and hundreds. I think that there's a middle ground.
All right, we have a few more here, and I'm going to try to hit them really quick. There's a suggestion that Metropolitan Water Reclamation District is offering free milkweed seeds. So if you're in the city area, there's a suggestion for you. Are aphids really a problem on milkweed? If you don't spray, are there any suggestions for aphids, or do you have a thought on that?
Aphids are a tricky one, and I might actually defer to someone in the group. Some of my advice is cut things back. I've also heard spraying them with water. I don't believe the aphid is actually harmful for the monarch, but if I am wrong, someone please jump in. Yeah.
Okay.
I can't see anyone that's nodding or saying no.
Yeah, wave your hands wildly if you want to be unmuted.
But yeah,
And then
I would just say you don't want to spray, because for obvious reasons, if a caterpillar eats anything toxic, that will be the end. And then I think also just celebrating whatever is eating your plants, right? Like, people will get mad that the tussock moths are on their plants, and it's like, well, instead, why don't you just be excited that these animals are growing and you're helping these animals. You know, every animal needs a host plant. So
um, there's a reminder about the DuPage Forest Preserve has a native gardening, a native plant sale on May 12th. Larry reminded us of that, and be sure you watch their website for further information on that. It's always awesome. So what's next? The question is, I'll read it directly. Would you make another circuit? Would you make another trip like this, or would you do something different? And do you want to tell us about any next adventures in the works?
it's funny because my trip was in 2017, so just enough time has passed that I'm like, yeah, I could do that again. But my dream right now is, well, right now I'm headed to California, where I have seasonal. First I have outdoor ed work, and then in the summer I do amphibian research in the mountains. So that'll keep me busy until in the fall. I am trying to write a version of this book for 10-year-olds. They were who I wanted to talk to on my tour, but life got in the way, and I wrote a book that's more for adults. But I'm working on that, and I would love and be willing and ready when that book is out to do maybe not a loop, but I'm committed to go Mexico to Canada once at least.
Oh my God, you're so amazing. I don't know if you were seeing the chat, Sarah. There are accolades up and down the chat. People loved it. And I want to invite anyone who wants to take yourself off of, put your camera on and wave to us if you like to. I have one final question. When did you decide to write your book?
On other tours and other adventures, people say, are you going to write a book? And I'd always say, are you going to buy it? And I didn't have a lot of interest. I felt like there's a lot of adventure books out there already. And then about halfway through my tour, I realized that I wanted my voice to be louder, and I wanted to reach more people, and that what I was seeing was important to tell as many people as I could. So about halfway through, I said, I'm going to write a book. And unlike a lot of adventure books, I really tried to make this, it's only half adventure. My tour is really just a vessel to tell the story of the monarch and to talk about why we should care. So it was therapy in a lot of ways. I kind of finished up kind of angry at what I'd seen. And so I liked that I could write and I could articulate my anger, and then I could also articulate why I hadn't given up, and why finding hope and finding so much support from people doing something was and is critical to our well-being and the monarchs as well.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's one final comment in the chat here. I want to make sure we get in. And Jeff, as long as I'm talking, I'm just going to say, if you have a way of unmuting folks and people want to say hello, thank you, in just a moment, that would be fine. Jeff has reminded us that Midwest Soaring, which Native American organization, is hosting a spring equinox ceremony at Churchill Woods Forest Preserve. It's just off of St. Charles Road in Glen Ellen. Sunday, March 20th at 11 a.m. So if you want he always talks about the Native American perspective of the importance of nurturing and taking care and preserving our nature. So it was a wonderful, we had over 200 people there last time they had an event there, and I think you might be interested. So many great accolades, Sarah. We cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much for doing this presentation.
Thank you. And thanks for being flexible with and patient with my setup. And thanks for making this happen. It's a lot of work to organize one of these. So special thanks to everyone that helped.
You had over 100
Lonnie,
people on. We're
Lonnie.
watching you.
Oh, wow.
We thank Lonnie Morris for her work in leading the DuPage Monarch Project forward. And I hope you'll connect with us through our websites, have our emails. And if you want to be more involved, we welcome you so much. And thanks for just doing it. I see so many great people on this. Vernon, LaCroix, yay! Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
What
you.
city, state is she
Wonderful.
talking from?
Nevada.
Yep, I'm maybe an hour from Reno. Gonna go gamble. Just kidding. I might just camp here.
Thanks so much. Bye,
Awesome.
everyone.
Take care. Have a good night.
Big.
I was gonna, where
bridge-
was the?
Bridge tournament starting on this weekend.